As Indian Buddhist mystic and tantric master Padmasambhava once said, just as water is shaped by the container that holds it, absolute truth must take the necessary form for each mind. The American people have chosen their next president, a divisive character whose temperament leaves much to be desired for a seemingly soft-skinned leader. He's been disowned by many in his inner circle from the previous presidency, and since leaving office, has been convicted of multiple felonies, including allegations of rape. Now, hear me out. Huh? I believe I'll present a balanced perspective, but in every story, it's good to start with a powerful establishing shot. And Trump seems to be leaving a trail of destruction wherever he goes. He's like a toddler with ADHD, brutally shaking the Etch-a-Sketch of the status quo. The existing state of affairs, by the way, not the 1960s British rock band. Like a personification of chaos, every move forward he makes rocks the boat. He's breaking everyone's toys, keeping them on their feet with his unpredictability. And the country might be left in ruins, but at least it could equalize the playing field. I don't know. It might not. After all, his desire for power and money is like a moth to a tiki torch. He may be the same as the politicians before him, but at least he says funny things like, in Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, the immigrants, are eating the cats. They're eating the pets that live there. A line that would be said from a satirized version of him in an episode of the often prescient Simpsons. So, why would someone vote for a man like that? And why might it matter to me in Europe? Well, when life is unbearable under the status quo, why not give a matchbook to the person covered in gasoline? Maybe, just maybe, in the aftermath of a maniac's mayhem, a phoenix might rise from the rubble of a charred White House. It may be difficult to disregard a person who raises his fist in the air after his assassination attempt, especially if you believe in God, because the bullet that ricocheted off his ear could be seen as a divine sign. Maybe. I have been fortunate to have lived in the United States for 8 years, 8 long years, getting more of an insight into the life of Americans from both sides of the political pendulum. So I feel a little more capable of understanding the far-fetched decisions and actions we so often see them make in bite-sized edited clips that appear on the conveyor belt of our phone screens. I was even in Washington, D.C. supporting a comedian on his tour the weekend of Trump's inauguration in January 2017. Man, I rang the comic, the talented Daniel Sloss, and I told him, you won't believe who's in town the weekend we're performing. We went to see the size of the crowd, brought ourselves the MAGA hats. Ours was made in the Philippines. Beautiful. Just a beautiful touch for a man who says he'd bring back jobs to the American people. I observed, I interacted with the people, just to get a sense of it all, you know. The next day, to balance and cleanse ourselves a little, we also went to the Women's March, where the hats were no longer ominous red, but bright pink. It was quite a strange sight seeing so many people wearing crocheted pussies on their heads. Let us examine a little what a second Trump presidency could mean for the USA, for the West, for the world, for the universe. Make the Milky Way great again. I felt compelled to discuss the Trump presidency because, as you may know, I was born in France, so I have a European passport. I also have a British one because I had to after Brexit. And I also have an American green card, so I am the allies. And maybe that's what we need. Let's start from one point in space and time, and then zoom out for a bigger picture. I am here now. Hello, I'm Eric. I live in the United Kingdom, specifically London, and I would like to know what role I am meant to play on this world stage. I'm a comedian, but it's sometimes hard to be funny when surrounded by screams. And maybe it's not something I want to do forever, you know? So understanding the geopolitical landscapes and how one thing affects the other could be a useful skill. The cost of living means goods and products, such as food, is more expensive now, most likely from the impact of a country who severed their relationship with the European Union, from crawling out of a painful pandemic, and from the effects of wars abroad, such as the Russia and Ukraine conflict, and the traffic jams of container ships in the Gulf of Aden, the area that connects the Arabian Sea to the Red Sea. So the price of eggs, for example, has increased by 50% since 2019, olive oil by 113%, The British's beloved baked beans has increased by 70.5%. Since the invasion of Ukraine, prices of petrol, aka gasoline, has increased by 40%. Pirates taking control of cargo ships and Houthi rebels drone striking them to the bottom of the sea has raised the price of shipping a container from Asia to Europe, and that's gone up by around 300% for some businesses. As Thanos would say if he were an economist, inflation is inevitable. We're all connected in ways that it's hard to see if you don't have time to float up in the stratosphere and look down at the bigger picture. There are peppering of riots across the country that erupt for various reasons, but whose anger and confusion is channeled towards immigrants and different religious groups, because politicians and the media use ingredients that have the taste of truth to manufacture something into an enormous issue, to get more visibility, to sell more papers, so that they can also, pay their rent and feed their kids. Want more money? Want more exposure? All you got to do is sensationalize what might impact people's lives. Tweaking and twisting, poking, prodding, stirring the pot, because anger and hate sells more than inspiring words that promote comfort, courage, connection, community. Cats. Public figures force this supposed concern down our throats until people are bloated, ready to burst, and all it takes is a small attempting at bursting their bubble to see them explode in animalistic rage and verbal diarrhea, because after all, in the fight for survival, you either become prey or predator. So far, what I've said can represent people from all sides, the right, the left. They both have puppets with their triggers and unresolved traumas that not only make themselves look foolish, but the side they claim to be on. Unwilling to consider that maybe the people on the other side, the ones they say they hate, is just a distorted reflection of their own insecurities. This is why I've repeatedly said that having the element of doubt in one's perception is important. It's exhausting, but it's important to constantly question what I am being presented with. But are these people, do I agree with them or do I disagree with them? Most times it doesn't necessarily make me feel more informed, but at least I know that I try my best to understand, so that I don't reactively blame others for my own position in the world. Doubt allows you to be a student rather than a teacher. Instead of constantly yelling and regurgitating other people's opinions and assuming you know best, you can listen attentively and appreciate that it's one perspective, that it may or may not be true, but either way, it means you can interact with someone non-judgmentally. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, huh? So you should be listening twice as much as you talk, says the guy with a podcast. So that's just the UK. That's just a sliver of what's going on in the UK. And all that from the perspective of one person, one nomad, one third culture latchkey kid. Even what I say could be wrong. That's why I said doubt is exhausting. It makes one hyper-vigilant, constantly looking ahead, over my shoulder, inward and outward, a constant dynamic risk assessment to stay alert at what is the most truthful path forward. Perhaps Bruce Lee said it best. Be like water, making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. We are connected across the globe in ways that are sometimes truly terrifying. A small butterfly flapping its wings could hypothetically cause a typhoon. The Dalai Lama is quoted as saying, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. Yeah, if you haven't had that experience, count yourself lucky. It's absolute nightmare. Every time you're about to fall asleep, the mosquito just gently passes by your ear, and its buzzing echoes in your eardrums. Your body convulses in complete darkness to swat it away, which makes your heart beat faster, making it harder to sleep. You remain paranoid all night until exhaustion finally knocks you out, and in the morning you wake up covered in bites, which you then scratch all day, fearing to return to your bedroom that night to repeat the cycle of abuse. I hate them. Maybe our reality isn't governed by causation, but is a cohesive structure, a synchronous ensemble, like the murmuration of birds, where there isn't a single being leading the way. The butterfly didn't create the typhoon on the other side of the world, because they are one and the same. All of us, quantumly entangled across time and space. This had to happen over here for that to happen over there also. Maybe, I don't know. But thinking in such ways, it makes it hard to track a story chronologically. You know, we need A to happen for B to exist, so that C can follow, etc. What's all this got to do with what I asked, huh? Why would someone vote for a man like Trump, and why might it matter to me in Europe? Well, something that Mark Twain once said comes to mind. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Raymond Thomas Dalio, an American investor and hedge fund manager, has a book called The Changing World Order: Why Nations Succeed and Fall. Now let me introduce you to his ideas. 2 days ago, I was overdrawn in my bank, under zero, which is always fun, living on the edge, baby. And I have no income on the horizon, so I am not well versed when it comes to economics yet. What I've learned from Ray Dalio is interesting though. Not just as an investment for one's own knowledge, but to better understand the recent elections. You can anticipate the future by studying the past, which is something fun to do from the present. The sentence I just said is already in the past, and I'm about to say the word future, but that's already gone behind me. Oh, time, you elusive little twerp. So let's look at currency devaluation. That's when a country takes strategic measures to lower the purchasing power of a nation's own currency. Basically, it runs out of money, so the banknotes, the bills that you have in your wallet, which says it's worth $10 or £10, is a type of negotiable promissory note. Right? So gold was how people traded since the dawn of currency, and banknotes is a way to say how much of that gold it's worth, because in reality, the actual paper in your wallet is worthless. So when countries print more of that paper than they have gold in the treasury, things lose balance. In 1971, when realizing the country was running out of gold, President Richard Nixon said,
"The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States."
This isn't the first time that happened. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt said the same, just with different words. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Basically, breaking the connection of paper money to gold meant that they could continue spending more than they earn by printing more paper dollars. More banknotes in the market means the currency loses value, and without a corresponding increase in productivity, and with this new printed money, people buy stocks and commodities, which cause their prices to rise. So it happened again in 2008 with the mortgage-driven debt crisis, in 2020 because of the pandemic-driven economic crisis. So what is Mr. Dalio teaching us? When central banks print a lot of money, buy stocks, gold, and commodities because their value will rise. Yum, yum, yum! But what does that mean for a people? When governments spend more than they take in taxes, things get bad and they need more money. So they print more, which makes its value fall and rise and raises prices on everything. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Internal conflict arises due to the growing gaps in wealth and values. Polarization between political parties inflect as the left demands for the wealth to be redistributed and the right wants to defend those holding the wealth. I remember telling myself that you need both wings to fly, hence why there's value in hearing both sides out. And while in America, someone once told me that the Republicans demand you to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and the Democrats are there to give you a helping hand if you can't. That may have been true once, but now it's difficult to tell what parties represent anymore. The sentiment holds true, though. You need both attitudes to survive. These patterns, which happen within a country, an empire, shares similarities across time and space. He saw this link between gold and printed money happen in 1850 in the United Kingdom, in 1650 in the Netherlands. The Dutch East India Company holds the distinction of being the first company to offer equity shares of its business to the public, effectively conducting the world's first initial public offering, basically the first stock market. They were once a world superpower. The British took over as the dominating force on the globe. The USA was next. And now, as the United States falls into despotism, elsewhere on the planet, another country rises. China. A new world order is coming. Order. What is the definition of order? The arrangement and disposition of people or things in relation to each other according to a particular sequence, pattern, or method. It also means an authoritative command. For the world, it's a governing system to help people deal with each other. Internal orders for people within the country, laid out in constitutions, and world orders for countries to collaborate with one another, laid out in treaties. When an older order is weakened, a rising, more powerful one takes control, creating civil and international wars. After the American Revolution, the US Constitution was created in 1789 to keep internal order within the country, and it's still being used today. Russia did the same in 1917, and that was repeated in the 1991 revolution. China started its internal order in 1949 when the Communist Party won a civil war. The French Revolution was in 1789, etc., etc. The world order has similar seasons. The Americans rose to power after World War II with the Allied victory. Treaties were written so that the countries could collaborate on how things should be governed and how monetary systems would work, laid out in the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. So the dollar became the world's reserve currency. And that's a currency that is commonly accepted around the world. These world orders exhibit patterns. Usually, each world's superpower's rise and fall overlaps with the previous and upcoming power, and these transitional periods involve conflict as the powers in decline don't want to go down without a fight. There is a sequence of events that happen inside these world superpowers which promotes their rise and subsequent downfalls. The rise begins in the aftermath of a conflict, which establishes the new leading power. Nobody challenges this new power, so a period of peace, prosperity, and productivity follows, which means people are comfortable, expanding, and therefore borrowing money to do that, which leads to a financial bubble. Shares grow, transactions are made in its currency, which in turn makes it a reserve currency, which leads to even more borrowing. This money gets distributed unevenly, so the wealth gap grows between the rich and the poor. So eventually the financial bubble bursts, which leads to printing money and increases internal conflict, leading to some sort of revolution, either peacefully or as a civil war. While this superpower struggles with this internal conflict, external rising powers take advantage of the situation of the superpower's domestic breakdown, usually leading to international wars. The winners get together to create a new world order, led by the new dominant superpower, starting the cycle again. At the helm of this rise is a revolutionary leader that gains support from the people and therefore power. And they use this advantage by converting, weakening, or eliminating the opposition. They establish new systems and institutions and choose people to succeed after them. Dalio measured an empire's power with 8 metrics: education, innovation and technological development, competitiveness in global markets, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, the power of their financial center for capital markets, and the strength of their currency as a reserve currency. So as education gets better, innovation is increased, giving the country a competitive advantage, etc. Embedded within the fruits of their success are the seeds of their decline, because as they become more expensive, other countries are willing to work for less. They copy the dominant power's manufacturing and technology for cheaper, making those countries more competitive on the global market. The superpower's rich don't want to work as hard. So that, they get to party and drink and be merry, making them less competitive. Values change as those who rose to the top worked hard for wealth and power differ to those who inherit it. Steeped in luxury and accustomed to the easy life makes them vulnerable to challenges. The rich become weak, but hidden in tall towers, away from harm. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The cost of maintaining and defending the empire, internally and externally, becomes greater than the revenue it brings in. So having an empire becomes unprofitable, and their overextensions recedes. The richer countries, now steeped in debt, is forced to borrow from poorer countries that saves money in the reserve currency, and them taking that action is an early sign of a wealth and power shift. Declines are gradual and then plummet suddenly. Financial bubble bursts, money gets printed, their currency loses value, political extremism is on the rise, and people fight amongst themselves, usually blaming those that are easy targets. Taxes on the rich usually gets demanded, which is when they flee with their money to another country. So it seems their patriotism and pride has a price. That's why it becomes difficult to trust the rich when they say that they love their country. Do they? Do they? Or do they love their financial stability? Productivity decreases because what's the point of working so hard when we working class don't get a fair slice of the pie? Resources diminish, fighting increases, anarchy erupts, and a strong leader is needed to establish order from the chaos. So, is Trump a force of order within the chaos? Or is he the chaos to dismantle the order? When a leader or a group promises something and they fail, that can hurt, but it might not cause damage if it's obvious they tried. When they lie and we discover that and we discover their corruption, we want to stay away. Like if you've ever been betrayed by a loved one, you know that trusting them again is difficult, maybe deep down impossible. In a strange way, I'm lucky to have had such a nomadic life because my constant moving means that I've never voted. I've never aligned myself with one party or the other. And my heart tends to lean to people that want the best for themselves and others, ideally helping the vulnerable when a society has resources to do so. And the more I meet people from both sides of the fence, the more I realize that's what they all want too. It's just that their definition of community differs with other people. Some overlap, some are distant, and thus tension and friction arises, like cold and warm winds clashing together to create a hurricane. I lived in the US for 8 years, and it's not that long, but I got more of a taste than people who only get their America from curated online clips. And even now, I'm not sure how to describe it. It has 300 million people living there. Each state the size of European countries. Some places you can drive for hours and not see a single person, while other places have towers of people piled on top of one another. As Andy Warhol once said, everyone has their own America, and then they have pieces of a fantasy America that they think is out there. So why did people vote for it? Why do people do anything? We're all pretty elusive and weird, and when things get tough, we discover we discover who someone really is. And believe me, America is a tough landscape to live in. Before moving there, I was anti-gun, and now I still think restrictions could be better. But I didn't really see that many guns flowing around, And it's obvious there's a problem because they have more school shootings than, everyone. But I also have a gun license now, and I did enjoy shooting them at a range. And during the pandemic, when I was living in an area where gun sales had gone up, it did make me think, what should I be doing to protect myself? I bought an axe. Not exactly going to protect me from an assault rifle, but I felt like a badass. I paid more taxes in the US than I did in Europe, but didn't get healthcare in return. In fact, I left the country with a pretty big medical bill, which if anything makes me even more American. Life in America for some is very good, but for most, it's many hours working long hours. Many hours working long hours, that's right, working to pay for their extortionate bills, keeping them chained to their jobs, because the smallest of variables could lose them their job, their car, their home, everything. As has been famously claimed, the top 1% owns more than the bottom 99%. 3 people own more than 50% of the nation. There's a gross imbalance here, that would make anyone angry if they could barely feed themselves or their children. The kind of anger that, as a French person, I understand, but alas, it's difficult to get close to billionaires and even harder to sneak a guillotine in their vicinity. When I was at the Trump inauguration, I spoke to many people, and most seemed like regular folk. There were a little Wild West for Europeans, spicy flavors, caricatures of American people, with a sprinkling of Bible Belt madness, but for the most part, genuinely lovely. I even asked some women about his comment on grabbing them by the pussy, and although crude, they brushed it off as locker room banter. We all have an inner yin and yang, our light and shadow. I think it's okay to laugh at cruder stuff. It doesn't represent who you are necessarily. He who knows not that the Prince of Darkness is the other face of the King of Light knows not me. If I would have voted in the 2016 American election, I would have likely chosen Bernie Sanders. Like Donald Trump, he went against the status quo, which is why he was popular. He would have been, and continues to be, a revolutionary figure. He was so popular, he supposedly won more states than Hillary Clinton, but they famously rigged their own inner election. When the country found this out, the distrust of the DNC grew. Now, I say supposedly and famously carefully because treading in conspiracy waters has a way of pulling you under. There's quote unquote evidence on the internet saying that it's true and evidence saying it isn't. So I don't know. Doubt. After this week's election results and in response to the DNC's loss, Bernie Sanders said, despite spending more per capita than other countries, we remain the only wealthy nation not to guarantee healthcare to all as a human right, and we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We alone among major countries cannot even guarantee paid family and medical leave. Young people have a worse standard of living than their parents. The working class has been abandoned by their government and are surrounded by signs of despotism, people living in tents and fentanyl zombies. And the status quo either don't want to change anything for the people at the top because that's where the money goes, and or they don't see those end of time signs because they live in more luxury than the majority. It's hard to believe something until you see it for yourself. Bernie continues, will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign? Will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any ideas as to how we can take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has so much economic and political power? Probably not. It's funny, looking back, people went against Bernie Sanders for being a democratic socialist because the word socialist likely triggered them, as it's closely related to communism, which is something most Americans are against. And yet, Trump seems to align with countries like North Korea and China, who are themselves communist, although apply capitalism for world trade. The world is so confusing. And so I once again return to the questions. Why would someone vote for a man like Trump? And why might it matter to me in Europe? It seems that Donald Trump, like Bernie Sanders, wants to disrupt the current state of affairs. Sanders, however, isn't willing to do it violently. Trump, however, might be completely fine with that. He's picked up on the working class and rural people's pain of being left behind and uses them to rise to power. Perhaps that's fine if he will genuinely help them. But with the bombardment of insults to most minorities, it's difficult not to see an autocratic rule looming ahead. Remember what Dale said, at the helm of this rise is a revolutionary leader that gains support from the people and therefore power, and they use this advantage by converting, weakening, or eliminating the opposition. Democracy is likely to be dethroned as the ruling government. The blood shall manure the ground in this seat of peace, tumultuous wars shall kin with kin, and kind with kind confound. He was after all described as a fascist by his own longest-serving Chief of Staff, John Kelly. I'm not smart enough to know whether or not it's true that he's a fascist. He may just be an opportunist. Fascists are the likes of Benito Mussolini, or, drumroll, here he comes, the equivalent of playing the Nazi card to ruin a debate, the old reductio ad Hitlerum, Adolf Hitler! I'm not smart enough yet to know whether that's a fair statement to make, but I do remember boiling with rage when I heard Trump agreed to separate children from families who crossed the border and put them in camps. They came into the country illegally, and so yes, there has to be a process, and yes, that may mean sending them back, etc., etc. I understand that, but I will never understand splitting families apart and giving children the kind of trauma that could make them future enemies of the country they thought would save them. That action showed a malice which I find unforgivable. It's important to remember that fascism is a process that gradually happens until suddenly you see a reflection of yourself in a uniform that bears the SS Skull and Bones, shoveling journalists in a dumpster fire, wondering how you let that happen. A fascist leader will blame the current system's problems on a supposed enemy within, scapegoats who will suffer the price of a lie. And that's why people are confused about why the majority voted for him. It seems that people are willingly turning a blind eye to his rhetoric because they'll likely be one of the guards at the concentration camps rather than the prisoner that'll be executed. The day the trumpet will be blown, and all those in heavens and all those on the earth will be horrified to the point of death. Here's one of my counter-arguments to why people voted for him, which I think holds truth, but I just don't know to what extent. An estimated 402 million terabytes of data is created every day, which is about 0.4 zettabytes. A word I didn't even know existed. To better understand that, here's some statistics. Over 4 million hours of content are uploaded to YouTube every day. As of June 2022, more than 500 hours of video were uploaded to YouTube every minute. Around 1.3 billion photos are shared on Instagram every day. 4.3 billion Facebook messages are posted daily. Google processes more than 40,000 searches every second. 40,000 searches every second. I believe, and I think it's pretty obvious, but people seem to forget that, it's easy for people to get sucked and lost in a slipstream of online content and media where they literally don't see some content that for others might be seen daily. It's like when you share your favourite movie or artist with someone and they've never heard of them. What do you mean you've never heard of Nirvana? It seems illogical to you that they've never heard of them. And that's because so much of your energy and time has gone nurturing their songs, and it's around you, it's in the environment. While the other person was busy listening to 1960s Portuguese jazz. What do you mean you've not heard of Antonio Carlos Jobim? I've seen many videos of Trump saying ridiculous and outrageous things that would indeed make him unfit to lead a country. I've also seen some videos where he seems pleasant, kind, funny, articulate. It's very possible some people live in a slipstream where the bite-sized clips they see is designed for them, where they only see one side of a person and not the other. It took over 4 seasons for Walter White's loved ones to find out that he was also Heisenberg. What do you mean you've not seen Breaking Bad? And with the knowledge that articles can be manufactured by bots, curated for a specific opinion, fueled by a specific algorithm, it's hard to know what to trust. Most people don't have time or even know what to search online to get a complete picture. I included. And at some point, you have to make a decision. As South Park once satirized in an episode about elections, the vote is pretty much always between a giant douche and a turd sandwich. Once upon a time, there was an old farmer who had worked his crops for many years. One day, his horse ran away. Upon hearing the news, his neighbours came to visit. "Such bad luck," they said, sympathetically. "You must be so sad." "We'll see," the farmer replied. The next morning, the horse returned, bringing with it 2 other wild horses. "How wonderful!" the neighbours exclaimed. "Not only did your horse return, but you received 2 more. What great fortune you have." "We'll see," answered the farmer. The following day, his son tried to ride one of the untamed horses, was thrown and broke his leg. The neighbours again came to offer their sympathy on his misfortune. "Now your son cannot help you with your farming," they said. "What terrible luck you have." "We'll see," replied the old farmer. The following week, military officials came to the village to conscript young men into the army. Seeing that the son's leg was broken, they passed him by. The neighbors congratulated the farmer on how well things had turned out. Such great news! You must be so happy. The man smiled to himself and said once again, "We'll see." The upcoming president of the United States not only supports a right-wing government, but right-wing movements around the world. Like I said, you need both wings to fly. You can't have light without dark, day without night. There has to be a balance. But the growing fear is that this tectonic shift will be very destructive, likely very painful to vulnerable people, and we will all be forced to decide how to proceed with what we experience. Trump seems ambivalent about major concerns such as the climate becoming more extreme. The Ukraine war needs to help. The Ukraine war needs the help of its allies to defend itself from an invasion, and Trump has said it would pull its funding, which, in the interest of balance, seems like a fair threat, as NATO members are encouraged to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, yet most countries aren't doing that. So, okay, reasonable request. Meet those demands. But if he pulls out, even potentially bringing back troops from the bases in Europe, this will leave the continent in a more vulnerable position. But who knows? It might force the countries to work even better together. We'll see. Trump said he would end the Ukraine-Russia war in a day by proposing a peace treaty, which Ukraine will likely not accept, as it means giving away parts of their territory and sending a message that a bully can just take territory and the rest of the world will watch it happen. And if Russian President Putin denies the deal, despite Trump's relationship with Vladimir, he might turn against him instead of NATO. It's hard to say because he's unpredictable. We'll see. As Odin once said, a wise king never seeks out war, but he must always be ready for it. I fear the future has wars which will venture closer to home. Perhaps we need that as a people, as a consciousness, to experience it on our shores, for we so often look at bloody battles on screens, disassociate from it because it's happening to countries far away from us. Maybe those that have been so complacent with peace have to remember war, to be grateful for peace. Si vis pacem, para bellum. Lastly, an odd thought arises in me, but potentially worthy of exploring and sharing. His name is Trump. I wonder if many consider this to be a divine sign, for when the trumpets sound in the Bible, it suggests the end times are nigh. It is a call to action, signaling God's people to unite, a sign to celebrate, of hope, of resurrection. Maybe that's why some embrace the apocalypse, because every ending is a beginning. Because for every empire that falls, there is one that rises. A trumpet is a warning, a call to readiness, or mobilization against a threat. Or in Lou Bega's Mambo No. 5, it also means a little bit of Monica in my life, a little bit of Erica by my side. Rita, Tina, Sandra, Mary, Jessica. They're all going to come and play with me. I mean, that does sound pretty good. We'll see. Thank you for joining me on this episode. Hope our future is bright. Remember to breathe. And remember that life can be beautiful if you just pause and appreciate the details.